hello, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from the highest point on Florida State's campus and the hottest room in Seminole sports. You're listening to Tomahawk Talk on WVFS Tallahassee, the voice of Florida State, coming to you live from room 420 inside of Diffenbaugh. Save your jokes at the door. I am your host, Nicholas Carlisle, bringing you the latest, greatest, and Florida Statist in everything sports, or at least as much as we can fit within the hour for people all around the world. Of course, you can find us on Twitter at @talk_Tomahawk, and you can call into the show at 850-644-1837. Once again, that's 850-644-1837. Welcome to Tomahawk Talk, everyone, and I wish I was joking on April Fool's Day, but we are back for only 1 hour. Where's the world's smallest violin?
Right. I was going to say, well, for me at least, after only 2.5 hours of sleep, I think I'm good.
Yeah, I think you're
solid
you're probably going on that. And I mean, that show was it was an exhausting show.
It was
too.
an exhausting show, but it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun too.
It was a unique experience for all of us.
Definitely some tired and sore voices after that one. Well, thank you to everyone who did tune into that show, by the way. Very, very appreciated. Regardless, it is no joke that we have a great show for you tonight, talking about how wrong we actually were about our Sweet 16 predictions from last week.
Just the whole tournament.
Yeah.
Just how wrong.
It's so hard to be chalk about it.
Yeah.
Think everything is going to go exactly as you think it is.
How many brackets had Texas Tech in the final four?
I don't
Zero?
Think, maybe in like one of my backup brackets.
Yeah, maybe.
But
wait, actually, the number I think on ESPN was something like 14% of brackets had them.
14%.
According to Jenny, our statistician, 0.4%, is that what? 0.04% got the Final Four correct.
And
Wow.
As somebody who plans to do this for a living, me not being one of them is kind of sad.
But I think that's part of the fun.
That's part of the fun, though. We're kind of just thinking about on our Sweet 16 and Elite 8 predictions from last week. I'm talking about the Final Four. The championship game, obviously, men's baseball continues to struggle, but changes are coming, according to Mike Martin. Enthusiastically coming from Mike Martin. I feel Mike Martin mad is kind of scary.
That I obviously didn't get a chance to go to the game,
Right.
but I heard that was not a very pleasant post game press conference.
I mean, for such a warm and caring individual, when he gets mad, he gets mad. But we'll get into that.
Yeah.
And the first weekend of the MLB season in the books. Just our first impressions in each division. What we think from the 4 or so games that every team has played thus far. Is I guess you could call it way too early, but it's not way too early. It's kind of like in the middle.
Well, and when there's 162 games in a season, yeah, it's a little too early.
Marlins are going 162. We have a lot to chop through tonight. Let's introduce the panel. What is a captain without his crew? I am joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host Chris Camacho, who flew out to Anaheim for the Sweet 16 game along with Luke Fay. Tell me about that experience.
Dude, what a time. And well, for me it was a homecoming. So to be able to go home, to be able to have the experience to go to the Honda Center, a stadium that I've wanted to go to, that's the home of the Ducks, a lot smaller than you would expect it to be. But the game itself was a lot of fun until it wasn't for Florida State fans. It was definitely a Gonzaga home game. Obviously, since Gonzaga is in Washington, there were a lot of West Coast people that were at the Honda Center. Just a great experience to be able to go and cover it. And, we're very thankful to WVFS, Luke and I are, to be able for them to give us that opportunity to fly out there. It was a good time.
And joining us tonight, the producer of Tomahawk Talk, Sebastian Angel Riano, always needs to fit in something about Formula One racing. I'm going to give you that opportunity right now.
Okay, I'm glad you did that. Hello, everyone.
We got to get it out.
If I want to get it out of my system, I only did watch 3 things over the weekend.
Only 3.
Well, I got a little bit of everything, but 2 things primarily. The baseball games, of course, I was there. Fun Saturday for Florida State fans, not so fun Sunday for Florida State fans when it comes to baseball. And, of course, Sunday morning, I just had to watch the Grand Prix of Bahrain. Gut-wrencher. Actually, just one of the most heartbreaking races I've ever seen. You've got a young kid who's just out, dominates the entire week, first in qualifying, first in free practice, first all the way through the race, and all of a sudden, when it finally seems like it's going to happen in the last 10 races, his turbocharger fails. He starts losing like 5 seconds on every lap. He's caught and passed by what eventually would be first and second. A team that's ruled Formula One with an iron fist for about 5 years now. Mercedes, the big evil guys who managed to make Ferrari look like plucky underdogs. I don't know how you do that. But just a guy in his sophomore year, just first place robbed completely from him, from no fault of his team, no fault of his own. Just unlucky day. Such is life in motorsport.
Such is life in motorsport that I know nothing about. But you made it pretty interesting there. Plucky. It was good word choice there.
Yeah. I don't know how you make the team with the second largest budget in Formula One, which is like 4 times like somebody or teams 2 like rankings down. They outspend other teams by an order of magnitude. I don't know how you make someone who is basically the Yankees of motorsport look like lovable underdogs who just like managed to have victory snatched away from them in the twilight hours of every single race. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it, but somehow Mercedes do it.
And to his right, Mike Peterson. How have you been? You haven't been on in a while. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, watched a ton of baseball this weekend, so my brain is literally fried, but doing well.
Okay. Well, let's hope it's not too fried.
Much like Nick after a full weekend of watching baseball.
Full week. Well, can you really complain after it's become every single week?
No, I don't know. Can you?
I don't think I can.
As a baseball fan,
he's built up an immunity.
But for you,
it's like from the Princess Bride. It's like the Princess Bride where he builds up the immunity to poison. I've built up an immunity to long baseball weekends.
Dare you.
Chris Camacho, Sebastian Andriano, Mike Peterson, and once again, I'm your host, Nick Carlisle, and we are starting Off the Top, which, if you didn't already know, is the segment where I take a look at the past week in sports, rip the top stories, and ask our panel about them, forcing them to come up with the answers off the top of their head at the top of the show. And tonight, Kristaps Porzingis is in hot water as reports emerged over the weekend that he was under investigation for allegations of rape that occurred in the back, I think it was the earlier side of February of 2018. This was the night that Porzingis tore his ACL playing with the New York Knicks, and the accuser has stated that she waited so long to speak up because she was considering money to keep quiet, about $68,000. It was later reported today the woman originally wanted an autograph and went into Porzingis' apartment and had a quote-unquote hostile encounter. Porzingis has adamantly denied these claims and are fully cooperating with the negotiation. Guys, this is always rough to talk about. It's hard to say what is true and what is not true. Just give me your take on the situation as well as your thoughts on the Mavericks, who traded for Porzingis before the trade deadline. The Mavericks knew about these allegations. What does it say about Mark Cuban and that organization, knowing that these allegations were at hand? I'll start with you, Chris.
Well, for starters, I think it's important to state that as reporters and as journalists, like you said, we don't know for sure what happened, and it's honestly not our job to make that decision. We don't know. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of the investigations. But just, off the top, I think for an organization like the Mavericks, and especially for someone like Mark Cuban, who in the last year, he was dealing with sexual assault allegations within the Mavericks organization, and it's just, I think it's, I don't know if you want to call it a publicity stunt on in regards for the Mavericks, and then bringing Kristaps over. But it's if you know about those allegations, you better be prepared to fight that, or be prepared to at least take on the battle that comes with that. And I don't entirely know what went into that and what their plan of approach is. Although I will give them credit, they have followed all the steps that they've needed to do. They've reported it to the National Basketball Association. They've been in contact with the women's legal team, if that's what you would call it, I guess. But I think the Mavericks have followed. They followed the due process to the best of their ability.
Sebastian?
I mean, I 100% agree with Chris. It's an investigation. It is not our job to determine who is right, who's wrong. That is for the justice system and investigators to go ahead and do. That being said, innocent until proven guilty is something that we treasure here in the United States. So let's wait and see. Let me just say that it is an utterly bizarre case. There are just so many weird details that are a part of the story that just make you double check the date to make sure that it's not April Fool's, and we're still going through this. And let's just this is a serious thing. But it's so weird. It is a weird case. I'm not saying that anybody is lying or anything on either side. I'm just saying it is bizarre. The money, the oddly specific money value that this individual requested from Porzingis.
The money was to be donated to brothers. I don't know if it was a college fund
Correct.
or of some
to pay
kind.
for
So
tuition, if I'm not
68,000 maybe is not as weird of a number as it would without that knowledge.
Right. I mean, I have a quote here from, I believe this is an ESPN article. Quote, in the handwritten letter that she described as a contractual agreement with Porzingis for payment of $68,000, a copy of which was obtained by ESPN. Porzingis' name is misspelled, and it is unclear whether the signature belongs to him. I mean, on one hand, it's just like that's kind of weird, and on the other hand, I mean, if it's faked, that's forgery, and that is very, very illegal. But you know, like at the end of the day, let's see. Let's just see. I don't know yet.
Mike?
I just think it's a completely very messy situation on both sides, and the way the Mavericks are handling it, they're saying it's not going to affect his practice time at all. But head coach Rick Carlisle says that Porzingis is, totally at liberty to take time away from the team if possible.
Yeah, this is a very, very weird situation because the details are kind of, and again, it's not our job as reporters to say what is and what isn't, but the details are kind of messy.
Yeah.
And really kind of head scratching. The fact that he tore his ACL literally hours before this alleged event happened kind of is very. I mean, I guess that Porzingis is a very strong individual physically, but I've never had my ACL torn before. I would imagine that you would probably want to have that treated and checked out before any of that happened. The fact that it's coming out now, the fact that it's $68,000, it's just very weird. Yeah. And I think the fact that it's so weird and it doesn't quite add up in all the right ways for a lot of people. I think that's the reason why the Mavericks were so okay with signing off on the Porzingis trade.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. I think it looks best on the Mavericks side because they've gone through due process. They've done what they needed to do. I think if you're cooperating to the best of your abilities and you've done what's required of you, I think it shows that there's less to hide. But again, you don't know how well these organizations have so much money, have so much power. You don't know how well covered up things could be either.
Right. So that was the Off the Top segment, sponsored by me, brought to you by me, answered by our panel. Really kind of a sad week in Florida State sports, especially for the basketball team. Really just not how that ended. We'll get into that on the latter half of the show. But as far as men's baseball is concerned, last week's show, they had a better week at Notre Dame, or facing against Notre Dame. But looking at the week ahead, you saw that there was another Florida game, second game of the Sunshine Series, and we all were kind of in agreement that Florida State had the danger to potentially fall into another extremely bad drought if they were beaten in the same manner that they were the previous matchup this season. They weren't. It was a bit of a closer game. I think 4-2 was the final score.
4-3.
4-3.
No, I'm sorry. You were right initially.
It was 4-2?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was right. And yet still, Florida State has still kind of found themselves in another really bad slump. They've dropped 2 out of 3 this weekend at Boston College, Chris, and as I said at the opening of the show, Mike Martin is looking to make some serious changes.
Absolutely. Well, I think you see tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, J.C. Flowers was announced as the starter for tomorrow's game against Jacksonville at home. You maybe think for the Tampa Bay Ray fans out there, thinking potentially opener situation where JC will go 2, maybe 3 innings and then go to the bullpen again. No, major changes though. Definitely need to be in the works, because in looking, if I'm not mistaken, especially defensively, the issue is there's not much depth on the positional side of things for Florida State. You look at shortstop, you got Nander DeSatis, who is tied with Drew Mendoza for the most errors committed on the team at 6 errors each. DeSatis is a young guy. You only hope that with more experience that'll build up, but Florida State still continues a streak of committing errors. If I'm not mistaken, they've committed at least 1 error in every game since Win 2000 against Virginia Tech.
Wow.
Yeah. And in looking at the total runs scored, Florida State pitching has allowed 147 runs. 22 of those, however, are unearned. And a lot of those have come in those weeks since. So it's it's a lot of defensive changes that need to come.
Nick, let me ask you a question real quick.
Yes.
So I'm going to focus on two games specifically because those are the two games that I saw in person. Those are the Saturday game, which was a win for Florida State, 4-3, and the Sunday game, which was a 8-0 loss for Florida State against BC. So let's just, for Florida State fans, let's focus on the positive outcome, which was the 4-3 win. So 4-3, how many runs do you think Florida State had? And how many runs do you think? Hits. How many hits do you think Boston College had, and how many hits do you think Florida State had?
If I remember correctly, Boston College had a lot more hits than Florida State. I want to say it was in the double digits, where Florida State only really had, I think, maybe 4 or 5.
You're correct. It was 11-4.
Oh,
so
see, I was paying attention this weekend.
And that's not even. So if we're looking at the negative, it's the same exact story. BC 15 hits, Florida State 4. Now, none of those runs translated. From what I saw, it was a lot of just leaving men stranded. Men stranded. There was just no and you can see it. There's no conversion.
And that was definitely, I think, one of the major reasons for the loss in the Friday matchup, as well as men left on base. But going back to the pitching, I think it's really curious that you bring that up, because the pitching was actually probably, at least the starting pitcher was probably one of the better things to come out of this weekend. When you take a look at the weekend as a whole. Shane Drohan, he threw like 92 pitches. He went really, really far into the game.
6 innings.
No, a 5 and 2/3 innings.
Both games were scoreless to the 6th.
But 6 hits, no earned runs, only 2 bases on balls, 8 strikeouts. So he's shown once again that he does have some really nice stuff. But the pitch count, again, got extremely high for him. And then, of course, Drohan was the starter on Sunday, and then C.J. Van Eyck had a 6-inning outing in the Saturday game, which really kept them in that. And eventually, I think, really, along with Jonas Scalaro, they really were able to get that victory. So when you bring up pitching, and Mike, you hear that J.C. Flowers is potentially starting in this Tuesday matchup against Jacksonville, but the starting pitching has been pretty strong this past weekend. What do you think that Mike Martin is really just trying to get out of Flowers in this outing?
I think, like kind of what Chris said, kind of as an opener, get maybe 6, maybe 9 outs. He definitely doesn't show a lot of confidence in his bullpen, especially Connor Grady, and even Clayton Kwiatkowski had a tough outing. So I think it's a wake-up call to the team. They should not have dropped the series to Boston College. And yeah, just trying to rally the troops, I guess.
So when you take a look at what Flowers is going to be doing in the start, everybody thinks maybe that it's going to be the first 3 innings. Who is going to be that person? I think this is probably extremely important for this baseball team. Who is the person, Chris, that you think Mike Martin calls on to kind of get Florida State through those middle innings? Because it is those middle innings that have been really detrimental to Florida State.
Are you talking about out of the bullpen?
Out of the bullpen. It's been the middle and kind of just the late innings, and really just the bullpen that's been dragging Florida State down as of late. The starting pitching has really improved. So,
well, if we're going based off recent history, you maybe go with Jonas Scalaro, who as Sebastian mentioned, was able to help keep Florida State in that game on Saturday. He went 3 innings, gave up 4 hits, 2 runs, but only one of them was earned. It's again, I think Florida State, yes, pitching has been an issue, but it's really been a defense in general. So if the defense can keep it together, if they can limit the errors, keep essentially it's helping the pitchers out, because I talked about this last week. It's if you can't keep things defensively sound, if you put your pitcher in these tough defensive situations, it's only going to get to them mentally. So I think Jonas Scalaro did a decent job. Again, finished off the game. And I could see him maybe going another 3 innings following J.C. Flowers.
And it's really interesting to see what Martin is going to do with the pieces that he has. Tim Becker, who's a walk-on for the team, he was actually the winning run in that game on Saturday, and it was his first start as a Florida State Seminole, which is a pretty cool story. His first start starting for Reese Elbert in right field, and he tore his ACL in high school. He had injuries throughout his time at Palm Beach State and out the time on the Florida State club team. And so he does have some kind of niche pieces that could really develop themselves and really prove to be beneficial. But Sebastian, like you were saying, it's really not going to help much when you just can't bat runners in, and that's really become one of the nagging problems for this baseball team. And that's what Mike Martin said in his post-game press conference on Saturday. He told me, we just need to do a better job at selecting pitches.
Absolutely. I mean, you just look at the 8-0 loss, the 3-4 loss, and you see especially the 8-4 loss. The 8-0 loss was a hard watch for anyone, really, not just Florida State fans. Drew Mendoza going 0-4, Robbie Martin going 1-4, Sada's going 1-2. Like, these are guys that were rock solid in February. These are guys who were rock solid last year, and the bats are just quiet. And pitching can give you 6 innings to work with, 6 scoreless innings to work with. But if you cannot convert, then there's really nothing they can do. I agree that pitching is an issue, but it's more of like it's a balanced issue, really. Everybody has an issue, whether it's infield defense, because we did see over the weekend a lot of balls going and like sneaking their way into the outfield from after a couple bounces in the infield, especially around in the area on third, basically. Mendoza was honestly not. I saw a lot of balls get past Mendoza on Sunday, absolutely. But it's just the bats have to do something eventually.
Yeah, I'm looking at their season stat sheet right now. Florida State has left 255 men on base in 27 games. That comes out to, on average, every game they're leaving about 9.4 men on base. It's a lot of runs.
Yeah, I just think it's also the law of averages. We came into the season, especially in February, very hot, scoring a lot of runs, dominating. And, now we're hitting a dry spell, but I would rather it happen now than compared to postseason time or even later in the season into May and June.
Do you think it's a question of effort, Mike? Because I don't think that I do think that the kind of the gas has been let off a little bit since the 2000th win. Do you feel that in any way? Do you think it's an effort problem, or do you think that it's just a young team?
I think it's just a young team. I mean, it's easy to settle in also, I think, especially after the 2000s win. But you come into the season, ranked in the top 10, a lot of hypes on you. You've got, a good recruiting class. I think now is where they're going to really show their grit and show what they're made of. And I think that's the message Mike Martin was trying to send.
So Florida State, of course, faces Jacksonville tomorrow. That's a home game at 6 p.m., and then they travel to Coral Gables to take on the Miami Hurricanes, who, for all you timed and weathered Florida State fans, you know how that series normally goes. But the way that this season has gone so far for Florida State, this could be a very pivotal series for them, especially being on the road. Florida State now getting into kind of that series at home, series away. They really need to grab. Yeah, they really need to grab one. I think away here. They at least need to come out 2-for-1 in this series. I think because then you go to Gainesville again for the final.
No, that's in Tallahassee next week.
Oh, right.
And that's what I was going to get to. Yes. Is you're facing Florida for the third time this season within the span of how long has it been? 3 weeks.
I think it's been about a game a week.
Right. Well, about a game every other week or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is definitely the time where this Florida State team needs to. I agree. They need to grip down. Bats. There needs to be some adjustments at the plate. You can't be leaving 9.4 men on base. That's again. It's putting these pitchers in these tough situations, especially against a tough Florida team that has just had your number for the past 3 or 4 seasons.
Do you think when it comes to the batting lineup, Chris, do you think it's a matter of simply moving somebody up and down the order, or do you think that somebody else is going to completely come in and get a couple of starts?
Well, I mean, I think the lineup has worked for them for the most part. I'm looking at Mike Salvatore, on base percentage is .423. That's one of the best in the lineup, and obviously that's what you want out of a leadoff hitter. You want somebody who's going to go deep into the count with the pitchers. Give the guys after you a chance to see what this pitcher's got, and then obviously someone who will get on base. Mendoza's been hitting in the 3-4 spot roughly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I mean you have the pieces in place. It's just not connecting for them. But that's something that's really hard to see when they're playing a team like Boston College, a team that is beatable, that Florida State should be beating, but it's not happening. And maybe that is where it needs to come into place. Is Mike Martin needs to make those lineup adjustments. It's a matter of I honestly, like, I haven't been in town the last 2 or 3 weeks to really watch this team, see, give the eye test, and see who's hitting well and who isn't. But maybe there are some offensive changes that need to come around.
If this BC series has not been a wake up call for the Florida State Seminoles, the Miami series definitely will, because Boston College is maybe last in the ACC standings, but
I think they were entering the series.
They were 4-7 going into the final game of the series. Florida State baseball is now 6-6 in ACC play, and if the slide continues, they are very likely to be 6-9. That is not great. Considering a College World Series run, which honestly seems very, very far away from where we are right now. February was great, but February reminded me of whenever I do well in the first month of a class, get a couple A's, maybe on an A on an exam or something, and then just completely relax and have to.
So you mean after syllabus week?
I feel attacked.
Yeah, no, I'm saying me too, bud.
But yeah, I mean, there has to be, and it's only when I really see that when it becomes a C or a D that I really go, oh my gosh, I need to get my butt back in gear. Hopefully the changes that Mike Martin. I was at both press conferences and the Sunday press conference. I remember seeing a tweet coming out of that saying, I've never seen Mike Martin so mad at a press conference. He didn't look mad. He just looked a little fed up. But maybe that's just how Mike Martin is. He's not one to get shouting, yelling, mad. He's just like, there will be change. There has to be change. There will be change.
Mike, if you recall last season, Florida State had a pretty similar start. They started off, I think, either 14-0 or 12-0, something. They breezed through non-conference play, very similar to this season. They dropped 4 out of 5 to start conference play last season, and it's really kind of scarily similar how these two teams have worked out. So knowing how last season ended up and seeing how this season has begun to shape up, I don't want to ask for your confidence level, because I think overall everybody's kind of just like, geez, what's going on? This team has completely flip-flopped in the past couple of weeks. But do you see Florida State taking a similar path throughout the rest of the season, or do you think that this is really just a sign of things to come?
I do think so. I think I see a lot of similarities between this year and last year. Going back on what Chris said, I think it's not a matter of them not getting on base, but it's a matter of production and clutch hitting with runners on in scoring position. So, I guess to quote Aaron Rodgers, relax, and just, this is the dog days of April, and, we won the ACC tournament last year, and I think we'll make another good run.
So we are going to take a short break here. We are about halfway through the show. We'll be back in 90 seconds, and we'll have Brett Rutherford with the time-honored tradition, the Seminole segment. You're listening to Tomahawk Talk on WVFS Tallahassee, the voice of Florida State. We'll see you after the break.
So that every day you're with me, I keep you close to my heart. Give me one more kiss before the boys arrive. Nashville to San Francisco is a hell of a drive, but don't worry, the Lord is good when the road is long, and we'll be back before you know.
Good evening. This is the Seminoles segment. I'm Brett Rutherford, and here is everything you need to know to be caught up in the world of Seminole sports. The Florida State women's tennis team continued their successful 2019 campaign with a victory against Clemson this past weekend. The win puts the team in 4th place in the ACC and only 2 matches behind North Carolina, who are undefeated in conference play. Sophomore Petra Hewell from Adelaide, Australia, shined on the weekend with wins in both her singles and doubles matches. She is paired with junior Andrea Garcia from Spain for doubles, and the two of them won the match that sealed the deal for Florida State. This coming weekend, the Seminoles travel to the Carolinas for matches against UNC and NC State. Megan King and the defending national champion Florida State softball team completed a 3-game sweep of the Virginia Cavaliers this past weekend. Coach Lonnie Alameda's squad is now 35-3 on the season and 8-1 in conference play, which is good for first place in the Atlantic Division of the ACC. The offensive barrage continued from the Seminoles lineup as they scored 35 runs across 3 games. They are 5th in the nation in home runs per game and 3rd in slugging percentage. The star of the show, though, was ace pitcher Megan King, picking up 2 wins in the series opener and finale and giving up no runs. She is now 18-1 on the season. On Wednesday night, Florida State hits the road to play their in-state rivals, the Florida Gators, in Gainesville. First pitch is scheduled for 7 o'clock. Patrick Butkovich, sophomore at Florida State on the swim team, was on his way back to Tallahassee today after a trip to Panama City on Sunday to help with the cleanup of the damage caused by Hurricane Michael last October. He was accompanied by almost 40 other student-athletes from Florida State. Hurricane Michael was the strongest storm that the Florida Panhandle has ever seen. Janarius Robinson, defensive end for the Florida State football team, was along for the trip. He lost his home in the storm last fall. Chad McGuire, a Florida State swimmer also from Panama City, said that he was glad they did their part, but that there is still work to be done. This has been the Seminole segment with Brett Rutherford. Now back to Tomahawk Talk on WVFS Tallahassee, the voice of Florida State.
Thank you so much, Brett, for the time-honored tradition, Seminole segment. Wonderful job, as always. So, on the other side of the break, we finished up talking about Florida State baseball, the ending of March that they've been having and what you can expect the next couple of weeks as they have a very, very crucial series, at least in my opinion. I think Chris agrees with me, at Coral Gables against Miami and then facing against the Gators at home. So that's the 3rd matchup this season. And it just seems like, especially with this season, whenever the Gators and the Seminoles match up, it just really derails the Seminoles in some form or fashion. But moving on, and normally I don't think I would have covered this, but I just thought it was extremely interesting. I saw an interview with James Blackman today talking about Alex Hornibrook and the circumstances and I guess I don't know. I'm struggling to find the word here, but I guess the situation that is going to happen when it comes to spring ball. Of course, the spring game is this weekend, and he was commenting on the transfer of Hornibrook, and he basically said, "Whatever helps me, whatever helps the team, I'm up for." I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, Chris.
On Blackman's
comments.
I think it's interesting because I think that really speaks to Blackman as a leader on this team. I know he wants that starting quarterback position. I know he wants it bad, but at the same time, you see the willingness in him and the drive to do whatever's best for the team. And I think that speaks to the true leadership that he's demonstrated, even when he was on the bench last season to Francois. One of the things that we always said was he's always the guy on the bench that is hyping up the team, that is getting the team ready. I think it just speaks to the great leadership qualities that he has.
Mike, what do you think about that?
Well, coming from an athlete's point of view, I feel like that's...
Is it what's needed to be said?
Yes, it's one of those things that you don't really mean at heart, but it's going to please the media, and it's a good answer. It's a good soundbite. But I think, obviously, the competitor in James Blackman, has this drive in himself, knowing that he's going to, have the job.
Just theoretically speaking, assuming maybe that Hornibrook gets the job over Blackman, how do you think that would affect him, especially with the situation that Florida State, there's not that many quarterbacks on roster?
Right. I think that puts him in a bind because pretty much last year he was redshirted with the whole Francois situation and, could have played, but they ended up holding him out some games in order for him to get the red shirt. So I think it's a matter of, honestly, it would kill his confidence as well because Hornibrook's, it's going to be a 1-year thing, and by then Blackman will be a junior, and I would say transfer, but there's no one else besides him, though.
Yeah.
Not that that's necessarily going to stop him. I mean, yeah, it would put Florida State in a bind, but at the same time, you can't blame a guy.
That would be really rough to see because I think Blackman deep down really does love the school. I think you see it in the way that he presents himself. As much as Mike brings up a very interesting point on maybe that is the answer that we're looking for and we want to hear, I think he does love this school. And obviously, this is a long ways away at this point, but I would be surprised if he's not the starter.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, this dude, his counterpart has only been here for less than a year. He has not seen play for Florida State. If he does get the nod over Blackman, the only reaction from him would be like, guys, come on! I've been here forever. Mm-hmm. I've been part of this organization forever. I've seen not one but two systems, and I'm fully accustomed to both of those systems. I have all the criteria that you'd ever want from a starting QB. I know I am. What else do you want? What
else can I do?
Yeah, what else
Sebastian's
can I do?
lining up to be his agent right now. I feel the fire coming.
I feel the fire. Sign him up.
I mean, to be denied in that way would be immensely frustrating for someone in that position. And honestly, as someone who's seen him for now 2 years, it would be kind of exasperating. It would be a massive gamble from Taggart, who's already who we here at the station have kind of discussed is not the seat is not flaming hot, but it's a light singe, you know.
He burnt his thumb lighting a candle or something.
Yeah,
that type of hot.
It's not. Yeah. Taking a gamble on a new guy like that is would be bizarre, and if it doesn't pay off, then he would be crucified for that, frankly.
So we were able to put it off for about 40 minutes, but just let's rip off the Band-Aid here. Florida State falling to Gonzaga in the Sweet 16, something that I figured was going to happen. I think I was one of the few. Did you predict with me that Florida State was going to lose this game?
I think I had some faith in the Seminoles. I honestly don't remember.
Well, it's not necessarily a matter of faith. I think this was definitely just a poor ending to probably one of the best seasons in program history. Of course, there's so many what-if questions. If Nichols was there and healthy, if Kofor wasn't going through what he was going through, how the Seminoles would have performed. But just looking at the stats and the way that this game played out, you're not going to beat many teams shooting 3 for 20 from three-point range, Chris.
No, absolutely not. I think that was one of the biggest hindrances to this team was their inability to shoot from beyond the arc. In addition, you also look at a guy like Kabengele, who normally has been the leading point scorer for the Seminoles. He just was not getting. I think Gonzaga had the paint locked up pretty well. They guarded him extremely well. Ultimately, it came down to Trent Forrest having to control the game in the second half.
Yeah, Trent Forrest said, "Get on my back," putting everybody in the backpack. Mike, seeing what Forrest was able to do for Florida State in this game, knowing that he could potentially and probably will come back next year, how does that make you feel about next year's team with how the heartbreak that they've suffered at the end of this season?
It gives me a good outlook, honestly, having Trent Forrest come back. I think we're still retaining a solid core. But going back to the game, I just think when Terrence Mann is your best player, so-called on the court, and he shoots 1 for 8, and you turn the ball over 14 times, like Chris said, you're not going to win many games that way.
So Sebastian, of course, Mike just mentioned Terrence Mann, and there are a few other seniors that are departing. Of course, Kofor is departing. Hopefully, I think everybody at Florida State hopes to the next level. Some people.
No reason why to think that they won't. I think they'll be fine.
What is? Obviously, this is extremely successful recruiting class for Leonard Hamilton and Florida State. What, in I guess in one sentence in your mind, describes the legacy that this recruiting class has left on this team, or left at this school?
They were slept on, but they delivered. Florida State is not as much as we like to meme about it. Florida State is not a basketball school, and the fact that they still they delivered last year and they delivered this year, I believe. expectations were exceeded both years, I believe. Maybe not so much expectations were met, let's call it, this year. Most people expected at least a Sweet 16 appearance. Last year, though, complete overproduction when it comes to expectations. I think they have a fine legacy, one of the finer legacies of any class here at Florida State.
And that was also a class that had, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan Isaac on it as well, who plays for the Orlando Magic.
No, that was 2 years ago.
Sorry, guys.
Well, and it's also an interesting point that actually Luke Fay, who's in the studio with us right now, tweeted about, was talking about how much you don't realize how much not having a guy like Obiagu and CJ Walker on the team like that. I thought that was interesting, because I think if you keep a guy like Obiagu on there,
if you have Walker and Obiagu on this team, I think it's Final Four is literally the floor. I
And
think
Luke, if you
I think a
wanna speak to
championship
that.
would be really ideal. Just seeing how this team played out. Of course, minutes will be minutes, and they have to be distributed accordingly. But Luke Fay is here with some shades that I don't know where he got those.
Cloud goggles.
But no, you're right in that. And let's look back on last year's Florida State team that went to the Elite Eight. What was the one thing that they talked about for other teams matching up against? What was the one thing that Florida State's team had?
Depth
Length.
and depth.
Length and depth. And so you lose Obiagu, who, as a freshman, I think he had the Florida State record for blocks in a year. You lose him, and that's a huge defensive presence. Now, I think he was only averaging 3 or 4 points a game, but just that in itself is going to go, and you're going to slide out Kumaji. But just going and looking back at the game, the real problem was you did not have a backup point guard. And so Terrence Mann is not a point guard. Polite is awful. He's not a Florida State caliber basketball player in himself.
Wow.
So you look at the game, and Trent Forrest carried this team, and Terrence Mann, truly, as a Florida State guy, he's a good player, but he is not a number 2 guy at Florida State. He is the 3rd or 4th option on a team, and when he's called upon to be the number 1 option, he struggles, and that's what he was at the beginning. If you remember when Kofor went down at the beginning of the year, why Terrence Mann was playing so poorly, he was the number 2 option, number 1 option. He's not comfortable in that situation. You thought that dunk was going to light a fire underneath Florida State. It did not. And I go back to that locker room, and this was the point I was going to make. You go and look at it. Nick, no one scored in double figures other than Trent Forrest. No one. Kevin Gelly, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know how many points he had in the second half. How many did he have in the second half?
Oh, in the second half, I don't know, but he had 8 overall, and that was tied with second most with Kamaji. But other than that, Forrest had 20, and he pretty much blew the rest of Florida State out of the water.
Yeah, I think Kevin Gelly might have had either way. Even if you only have 4 points in the second half, it's not very good. And so you look at that locker room, and Chris, when we were in it, it just draining. I had a couple of friends who were team managers there, and we were looking at each other, but we weren't acknowledging each other because we knew the situation. And every single player that they interviewed was embarrassed by their play. They knew that. My argument is Trent Forrest had the greatest game of his Florida State career.
I would agree.
Every single other player on that team had the worst game of their career. Every single other player. And so you look at the interviews, and they all go, they're all just so disappointed in their own play, but they go and say, Trent played amazing today, and we couldn't do it without him. And Florida State would have gotten beat by 30 if Trent Forrest is on the floor. And you got to hang. They say hold your head high, but everyone was hanging their head low because they knew that they were this close away from having something special and losing some of those players and everything that happened.
What's even crazier is like you still see the leadership on this team because so when we first got to the locker room, it was everybody in the team. Swollen eyes, everybody's just really down. It was a really solemn environment.
Doesn't compare at all to the locker room after the loss to Miami for the football team. It was worse.
It was worse because you had a couple players crying in the Miami one.
Yeah.
Every single one of those players was crying and knew that Florida State's not going to get another team like
right,
this.
Exactly. No, I agree, and it was. I think it goes back to what you said, Luke. It's they were embarrassed. I think
they were really embarrassed.
This was. Gonzaga was probably the easiest 1 seed to beat. That was if Florida State was going to do it against any team.
I disagree with that statement, but continue.
I think Florida State still would have had a chance if you would have had Trent Forrest, if Vassell would have maybe put up a few more points. If you have Terrence Mann, Vassell, and Trent Forrest banging on all cylinders, I think this game would have been a lot closer, and Florida State might even have been able to pull up the upset.
So hearing all of that, Mike and Sebastian, knowing what the locker room was like after the game, knowing what the potential of this team was, I asked. I don't know if it was the 2-hour special or if it was the week before. Or no, I think the week before was spring break, so it must have been the 2-hour special.
You guys.
I asked.
45 minutes
I asked if people were satisfied with the Sweet 16. If the fact that back-to-back Sweet 16 was enough to validate how good this team was. So to you, Mike and Sebastian, do you feel like the Sweet 16 was enough, knowing what this team could have been?
I think in any other year for Florida State, I'd say yes, but knowing the caliber of this team, I'd say it was a letdown, especially with a perhaps even better roster against the same team of Gonzaga.
I think we're going to actually disagree with that. I think I, as a spectator, am stated with how back-to-back 16s. Getting to the Sweet 16 is hard. Getting to the Sweet 16 2 years in a row, outside of being a blue blood, is also hard. Going up against Gonzaga 2 years in a row is hard. Yes, you can bemoan and wonder about what could have been. 3-20 from beyond the arc is never going to cut it for any game ever. It doesn't matter who you're playing. You just, at this point, there's only one thing you really can do. It's sit back, laugh at your own bracket, and watch the fire rise for next weekend for the Final Four.
So, Nick, I have a question for you.
Sure.
This was the greatest Florida State team that they've ever had, just going off of wins and whatnot. Now, they didn't make the Elite Eight, but what does Leonard Hamilton need to have the same team next year, like the same amount of talent-wise, or be better than what they had this year? Because they had what do they need?
Point guards?
Well, point guards, but my mind immediately just goes to you need to have another three-point shooter. PJ Savoy was wildly inconsistent all year. You don't have Brian Hangola anymore coming back from last year's team. You need to have somebody that can shoot the ball because the recipe for beating Florida State was always pretty clear. If you could prevent them from going inside and you force them to take jump shots, it's a very, very beatable team. But the problem is that, Kabengele and Kamaji, more so Kabengele than Kamaji, were really outstanding pretty much all season. So, Luke, I guess really just, I don't know if it's the easy answer, but I think it's the right answer. Hamilton needs just some help offensively. The defense has been great the past 2 or 3 seasons. You need to score the basketball in order to win, and that's, I know the saying in most sports is defense wins championships, but in basketball I think more so than other sports, you just need to score the darn ball.
Chris, is this going to be one of those teams that you look back on and say, this was as good as Florida State basketball was ever going to get?
I think if everyone's healthy, absolutely. I think if you would have had, obviously with Kofor it's different because not only is it an injury, but of course the loss of his father.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you also have David Nichols on the court as well, that changes things up too. I think if you have a healthy Kofor and Nichols, you maybe make it to the Final Four.
What I'm saying though is, do you think that Florida State will ever reach what they have in the last 2 years?
Well,
have they peaked? Have they peaked as a program?
I don't think they have peaked as a program because I forget who said it earlier. Florida State. Oh, Sebastian, you said it's not Florida State's not necessarily a basketball school, but I think they've shown a resurgence. I don't even know if it's a resurgence, but they've shown that they're a serious contender. Especially the past 2 years, Florida State basketball has shown that they can go deep into a tournament, and I think that puts them in a better light when it comes to recruiting. So I think, you've got top-tier talented basketball recruits looking at Florida State as a possible destination. Of course, it doesn't help when Anthony Edwards chooses Georgia over Florida State, but
for a can of Pringles.
Bag.
But I think it opens up the door for more recruits to start looking and say, hey, let's look at what Coach Ham has to offer.
So I want to hang on. I want to close out my my statement with I know I did say at the beginning of this that Florida State is not a basketball school, but I do have to take my hat off to everybody in that organization with the doom and gloom that you've seen on campus from the football woes, the uncertainty of last year, and the chaos of this year. the basketball program at Florida State has been a rock for its campus and the students around it, and just the greater Florida State family across the country. And in a sense, the school has very much become a basketball school in that sense.
Until football.
Until
Football rolls around in the Win Chase, where let's all go down the Doak.
And then there were 4: Texas Tech, Michigan State, Auburn, Virginia. Chris, your general thoughts? I mean, you were out there in California, so obviously you saw a few games, but I don't know if you've caught up on everything else. How are you feeling about this Final Four, and how does this change your champion at all? I think you had Michigan State, so I don't think it affects you all that much.
I'm a win away, one win away. As long as Michigan State can beat Texas Tech, I will win at least in one of my brackets.
I'm just going to give you it because we both thought Michigan State was going to beat Duke, and we were right.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to be happy about that one.
Well, listen, I think, again, as I said at the beginning of the show, I don't think anybody expected Texas Tech to be in the Final Four. Granted, I told Luke this too after Texas Tech took down Gonzaga. I'd like to think that if Florida State had advanced, that they would have beaten Texas Tech. But I think the Raiders, Red Raiders?
The Red Raiders.
I think the Red Raiders have shown that they're in it to win it. Granted, I don't know that they'll make it past Michigan State. I think your final will be Michigan State and Auburn.
Really? And Auburn. I believe in Auburn as well. I would ask you, Sebastian and Mike, but I did want to talk about a little bit of Major League Baseball. It was.
Oh, thanks, bud.
Yeah.
Throwing us a bone out here. Maybe next year, if next April Fools, we can talk about hockey, huh?
Okay. Well, don't get your hope. Well, I'm not going to be hosting next year, so.
Yeah. I'm rubbing my hands, audience.
Okay. Well, maybe somebody will find hockey. I'm kidding. Hockey is a very entertaining sport, but definitely not the mainstream, especially because Florida State doesn't have a hockey team. If Florida State had a hockey team,
they have a hockey club.
They have
a hockey club.
An actual hockey team,
and a field hocky club for the ladies.
Okay, all right. Let's mute Sebastian's mic real quick. I asked at the beginning of the show. I wanted you all to go through the divisions, take a look at the first 4 or so games that have been played for each team thus far, and give me just your blanket statement take on the weekend that division had. So starting with the AL East, Chris, what do you think?
AL East, well, you've got the Yankees. You have the team that's predicted to win the World Series.
Cats and dogs living with each other. It is chaos down in the East.
Right, absolutely. And I think the Rays have shown that they've got a formula that's working for them. I think the series between the Yankees and the Orioles was a fluke, to go back to that. Just a good start for them. But I think just all around the league in general, you've got some pretty topsy-turvy scores and some things that you didn't expect.
Mike?
Yeah, 10 of the New York Yankees are on the injured list already at the beginning of the season, including Giancarlo Stanton, so that certainly played a factor.
Sebastian?
I just want to point out the Mariners are somehow 5-1 on these standings.
Well, they were playing earlier.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they did play in
A's.
Japan. That's right.
Correct.
I completely forgot about that. But that is a market that has long been starved for season-long success. So I wish them nothing but the best, really. I know it sounds like homering, but honestly, I don't really keep up with the AL West until let's call it late June, late July. Another thing to note, NL East, Atlanta going 0-3. They did not look spectacular, to say the least.
And listen, they're playing against. I'm not gonna, when I say juiced, I use that loosely. Against a stacked Phillies lineup. But I think you expected this to maybe go 2 in favor of Philadelphia and Atlanta to at least take 1. You've got the reigning rookie of the year.
At least give everybody else a reason to really.
Sure.
But they honestly look not that great.
Nothing special, nothing right.
There's still 159 for them, but I mean, that is a little concerning for our friends that do follow the Braves.
You know who isn't that concerned right now?
What?
The Los Angeles Dodgers.
Oh my God! There it is.
No,
There it is.
I don't want to.
This is why I don't talk baseball on the show, because everybody just decides to hijack everything for themselves. Mike, you've been fantastic, by the way, in not hijacking. I really appreciate it. I'm kidding.
Capital J journalist.
Thanks,
Yeah,
bud.
capital J. Just take on AL East, and just real quick, because we're going to start going rapid fire here. Take on the AL East. Red Sox have a championship hangover, I think. It's going to take them a couple weeks to get things going, even though I don't think the Mariners are that good. I think they really have just had a very opportunistic opening week. So AL Central, real quick, Chris.
Well, we were talking about this before the show. I think
Central.
it's going to be a little closer than people expect between the Indians and the Twins, but I still expect Cleveland to pull out.
Mike?
Same here. I agree with Chris. Cleveland definitely winning this division.
Sebastian?
Year in and year out, I always call the AL Central the Comedy Central because it is always a joke. Twins. I like Twins.
Like Twins, I kind of agree with that. This is the kind of the who cares division this year. And who cares now, but people are going to end up caring a lot later when it does get very, very close. But right now, it's just you just kind of look at it and you're just like,
Well, what's going to be interesting is looking at that AL wildcard spot.
Yep.
Because you have 3 teams in the AL East that are all fighting obviously for the top spot, and then the 2 left over who are going to be competing for wild card. Twins, I think, could also make a run for that.
The AL West.
AL West. Houston, they're off to a slow start. Not what you expected, but I still think they have the depth to come out on top.
Mike?
$300, $400, $500 million. It doesn't matter how much you pay Mike Trout. The Angels are not going to win the division.
All right, Sebastian.
I also have Houston there, but I will say that I do have Oakland taking that second wild card slot, with Boston taking the first. You'd love to see a story like the Rays just kind of sneak in to a wild card spot, but honestly, like the AL West and the Central just make it so much easier for a team like the A's to make it through. Whereas 38 games against the Yankees and the Red Sox will do a number on you.
I know that the Rangers won on a wild pitch off. I guess that's what you'd call it. A wild pitch off. They walked off
it'd be
on
a walk-off wild pitch.
Walk-off wild. There you go. You said it better than I can. I know that was lucky on their part, but watch out for the Rangers this year. Watch out for the Rangers. Moving quickly, we kind of already covered the NL East. I guess, I don't know.
I'm just going to throw Philadelphia
Yeah.
takes to the East.
Yeah.
Robinson Cano homered in his first at-bat as a Met, but I think that, the Washington Nationals will win the division.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay, that is the hot take of the night. I also have Phillies, but I honestly think that DeGrom gets his back-to-back Cy Young.
Yeah, and then I think story for this division, Harper fits Philly, and we're running out of time, so I hate to take over and just do it for myself, but have to be selfish here. NL Central, big takeaway from that. Brewers won the Yelich trade.
Yeah,
Brewers absolutely won that trade. I mean, it's very easy to see. Yelich didn't necessarily, wouldn't have had that season in Miami, but he's having back-to-back seasons, looks like in Milwaukee, so good for them. NOS, Dodgers are basically the same as they were last year. They're just going to hit a lot of home runs, but will that benefit them in the long run? So we are perfectly out of time right now. Thank you all so much for listening. You've been listening to Tomahawk Talk on WVFS Tallahassee, the voice of Florida State. For Chris, for Mike, for Sebastian, for Luke, and for myself, Nick Carlisle. New releases up next. Thank you so much for listening.